Imagine sitting in like a brightly lit room in Vienna. It's June 2022.
Hmm.
And gathered around this table are 8 people who, you know, on paper, they have absolutely nothing to do with one another.
Right.
On one side of the table, you have 4 Bukharan Jews, and on the other side, 4 Muslims from Afghanistan.
A fascinating setup.
Right. And the air in the room is probably, I don't know, a little tentative, maybe a little polite,
Hmm.
because they are there to participate in a reading group organized by a researcher specifically to read classical Persian poetry.
Yeah, like the beautiful, intricate works of Omar Khayyam.
Exactly. So as the reading begins, a Bukharan Jewish woman named Karen, she sits back and she's listening to the Afghan strangers across the table read aloud,
Yeah.
and suddenly she just freezes.
Oh, yeah.
Because the words that are washing over the table, they're entirely familiar to her.
She realizes they're speaking her language.
Yes. She realizes these strangers, these Afghans, are speaking the exact same mother tongue she grew up with. I mean, for her entire life, she thought the language her grandmother spoke was, exclusively a Jewish dialect.
Right. She called it Bukhari.
Exactly, Bukhari.
Yeah.
She had absolutely no idea that it was essentially the same Persian language spoken by the Muslims sitting just a few feet away from her.
It is an incredibly powerful, almost cinematic image.
Yeah, totally.
And the emotional weight of that realization, it doesn't just stop with Karen.
Oh, really?
No. By the end of that very session, an Afghan woman named Shirin looks across the table at the Jewish participants, and she says something that honestly reads like a small miracle of recognition.
Wait, what did she say?
She says, "You understand that you are not alone with your story."
Oh, wow.
Right. That right there, that profound moment of a shattered boundary, that is the beating heart of the research we are diving into today.
I love that.
Yeah. Anthropologist Ariane Sadjed captured this in her incredible work. It was published in History and Anthropology, and it's titled Recovering a Mutual Language.
The idea that 2 groups of people could sit down, assuming they're total strangers, only to realize they share a mother tongue, it's just staggering to me.
Yeah, it really is.
And Sajid's research, it uses this specific encounter in Vienna to pry open a much larger global conversation.
Yes.
Because today, our mission for this deep dive is to look at how memory, language, and shared culture between Jews and Muslims have been forgotten.
Forgotten and actively rewritten.
Right. Actively and sometimes aggressively rewritten.
Yeah.
And how, against all odds, recovering that shared history might actually be the secret key to rebuilding trust today.
The central thread we're pulling on here is that the intense estrangement between Jews and Muslims,
Right.
this rigid boundary that feels so permanent and so ancient to us right now, it's actually not the natural state of history.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. It is, in many ways, a recently manufactured reality.
Yeah.
By tracing the epic, multi-generational journey of Bukharan Jews, right, from the Emirate of Bukhara in Central Asia all the way to modern-day Austria, we get a front-row seat to the mechanics of human identity.
To see how it's built.
Exactly. We see exactly how identities shift, how they harden, and how they mutate under extreme political and social pressure.
It kind of makes you wonder about your own family history, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, for you listening right now, think about it. How many of the deeply held traditions that you consider your core identity, the things that make you, you, how many of them are actually just recent survival tactics?
That's a great question.
Right. Things your grandparents or great-grandparents invented or maybe adapted just to survive in a brand new environment.
It's a slightly unsettling thought, honestly.
It is, but it's crucial for understanding Karen and Shirin in that room.
Definitely.
So, okay, let's unpack this. I want to pull apart this poetry room experiment a little more. Because the implications of Karen not recognizing the origins of her own language are just fascinating to me.
Yeah, let's get into it.
How does an entire community just forget where its mother tongue comes from?
It sounds impossible.
Right, because Karen literally had never heard Tajik or Afghan Persian spoken in a way that connected the dots for her.
No, she hadn't.
She just thought, this is Bukhari, this is what my Jewish family speaks, end of story.
To understand the mechanics of that kind of cultural amnesia, and honestly, the sheer speed at which it happens.
Because it was fast, right?
Extremely fast. We have to look at the massive disruptions these communities faced over just 2 generations.
Right.
You have to remember, These are two communities that shared a homeland, a rich literature, and a language for centuries in Central Asia.
Centuries of shared history.
Exactly. But then you introduce the Soviet era.
Oh, right.
Yeah, during the 20th century, the indigenous languages of Central Asian Jews were systematically displaced by Russian.
Okay, so the state steps in.
Right. The Soviet machine aggressively promoted Russian as the language of upward mobility. It was the language of the intelligentsia, the language of education and of public life.
Right, so the mother tongue gets basically pushed out of the public square and retreats into the home.
Exactly. Bukhari was relegated entirely to the private sphere.
Wow.
It became the language spoken by the grandmothers in the kitchen.
Yeah.
It was no longer the language of commerce or literature or the streets.
That makes so much sense.
And then the second massive disruption hits.
Which is?
Migration.
Ah.
When these Bukharan Jewish families eventually migrated out of the Soviet Union to places like Austria or Israel, that dominant Russian language was replaced yet again.
Like German or Hebrew, I'm guessing.
Exactly. This time by German or Hebrew. So within a very short, volatile time frame, the linguistic bridge to their Muslim neighbors was utterly dismantled.
Like it was just bulldozed over.
Pretty much. The language became an isolated relic. The broader context of its shared nature simply vanished from the community's collective memory.
Man, I'm trying to picture what that feels like on an individual level.
It's hard to grasp.
It's almost like finding a locked, dusty trunk in your attic.
Okay, I like this.
You know it belonged to your great-grandparents, right? But you assume the key was lost forever.
Right.
So you just accept that whatever's inside is entirely private, maybe a little mysterious, but ultimately yours alone.
Yeah.
And then a complete stranger walks into your house holding the exact spare key on their keychain.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to look at it.
And the key fits perfectly.
Yes. And the shock isn't just that the key fits. It's the sudden realization that the trunk didn't just contain isolated Jewish artifacts.
Wait, what did it contain?
The trunk contained a shared world.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It fundamentally rewrites your understanding of what belongs to you and who you are actually connected to.
That gives me chills.
And to really grasp the magnitude of what was locked inside that trunk, we have to travel back to the world where that language was originally spoken.
Okay, where are we going?
Back to where that shared culture was forged. We need to go back to the Emirate of Bukhara.
Yes. I love diving into this part of the history because it completely shatters the assumptions a lot of people hold today. We're traveling back roughly between 1785 and 1920. And the Bukharan Emirate was a place where Jews held real standing and cultural influence.
Very true.
Sadjed's research brings up a fascinating historical figure, Levi Babakhanov.
Yes, Babakhanov.
He was a highly celebrated Jewish court musician who performed for the last emir of Bukhara.
He was incredibly famous in that region.
And to give you listening a real sense of the historical reality of this time, there's this incredible artifact from the 19th century.
Oh, the letter.
The letter. It's written by Rabbi Pinchas, who is actually an ancestor of that same famous musician, Babakhanov.
The context of this letter is so telling.
Set the stage for us.
So Rabbi Pinchas is writing to Maurice de Hirsch.
Okay.
De Hirsch was a very wealthy, very famous European Ashkenazi Jewish philanthropist.
Like mega wealthy.
Oh, absolutely. And de Hirsch had essentially heard about these quote-unquote exotic Jews living out in Central Asia.
Right, out in the east.
And he offered them a massive sum of money. We're talking 20 million rubles to support their community.
20 million rubles.
A fortune.
Which, I mean, on the surface, that sounds incredibly generous.
Right.
But it was entirely based on a projection.
Completely. De Hirsch and the European Jewish establishment, they basically assumed that because the Bukharan Jews were living in a Muslim-majority land, they must be destitute.
Ah, I see.
They assumed they were oppressed and in desperate need of European salvation.
They were projecting their own narrative.
Exactly. They were projecting a very European narrative of Jewish persecution onto a Central Asian reality.
And that's what makes Rabbi Pinch's response so amazing.
It's iconic.
He writes back and essentially says, "Thank you, but absolutely not. We don't need your money."
Yeah, he turns down 20 million rubles.
But the phrasing he uses is what really stops you in your tracks.
Oh, read the quote.
He writes that the Jewish community in Bukhara lives peacefully, quote, under the wings of the kingdom of Ishmael, the kings of grace and mercy, lovers of Israel.
It's just so powerful.
He explicitly states that they are loyal servants to their king, living in tranquility. He flat out refuses the European money because they simply do not fit the narrative of the oppressed victim that De Hirsch is trying to cast them in.
That letter is a historical sledgehammer.
Seriously.
It shatters the retroactive modern assumption that Jews in Muslim-majority lands were constantly living in a state of terrified subjugation.
Right.
The historical reality of coexistence in the emirate was deeply, inextricably intertwined.
Give me an example of that.
Well, take the music, for example.
Okay.
Jewish and Muslim musicians, like Babakanov, they didn't just perform in separate spheres.
Right. They weren't segregated.
No, they performed together at the court. They actively developed the classical music tradition of the entire region, which is known as SHAS together.
Together.
It was a joint cultural enterprise.
And it went beyond just art, right? It was woven into the fabric of daily life.
Absolutely. The boundary between communities in the emirate, it ran along lines of profession or, which specific town you were from.
Or your family lineage, maybe.
Exactly, family lineage. It did not run along an absolute hardline religious divide.
Wow.
Even their visual identity was shared.
Really?
Their clothes.
Yeah. Their traditional garments were nearly identical.
That's fascinating.
A Jewish rabbi's white velvet coat with, intricate silk embroidery looked almost exactly like a Bukharan Muslim's traditional dress.
No way.
Yes. They occupied the same aesthetic and cultural universe.
But okay, this is where the narrative takes a really sharp, almost jarring turn.
Here comes the twist.
Right? Because Sadjed doesn't just look at the historical archives. She interviews people today.
Yeah, her ethnographic work.
She speaks with a modern-day Bukharan rabbi living in Vienna. She gives him the pseudonym Rabbi Aaron.
Okay.
And Rabbi Aaron tells the story of Levi Babakanov, that famous court musician we just talked about.
But he tells it completely differently than the historian record suggests.
Yes, the re-narration is stark.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Go for it.
Rabbi Aaron layers on this heavy narrative of coercion.
Coercion.
Yeah. He claims the emir forced the musician to come play for him on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish high holiday.
Wow.
He emphasizes that the Jews were totally separate from the Muslims, explicitly stating to the interviewer, of course, there was no assimilation.
Shader very carefully points out that this idea of coercion, framing the act of playing for the emir on a holiday as a forced, oppressive demand rather than, a massive cultural honor.
Yeah.
That is a distinctly modern interpretation layered onto the past.
He's rewriting it.
Yes. The modern rabbi is taking a documented history of deep integration, shared music, and mutual respect, and he is actively tweaking it.
Well, why?
He is retrofitting the story to align with a contemporary framework where Jewish and Muslim identities must always be fundamentally opposed and antagonistic.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the motivation there.
It's complex.
Because if the historical record, like Rabbi Pinch's own letter refusing millions of rubles because life was so peaceful, if that shows this beautiful integration, why is a modern rabbi tweaking the story to make it sound oppressive?
Wow.
It feels like taking a beautifully blended watercolor painting, right? Where all the colors bleed into one another.
I like this analogy.
And taking a thick black Sharpie to draw hard lines between the colors.
Yes.
Why ruin the watercolor? Why does Rabbi Aaron feel such an urgent need for those hard Sharpie lines today?
Because the gallery he is trying to hang that painting in today only accepts line art.
Oh, wow.
The audience has changed and the rules of survival have changed.
Okay, unpack that for me.
To understand why Rabbi Aaron feels the need to draw those Sharpie lines, to enforce a retroactive narrative of strict separation, we have to look at the massive trauma of migration. We have to look at what happened to these Central Asian Jews when they left that integrated watercolor world of Bukhara, navigated the Soviet system, and eventually arrived in Europe.
This brings us squarely into the 1970s.
Exactly. The 1970s.
This is such a crucial pivot point.
It really is.
Because the Soviet Union had become an increasingly difficult and restrictive place to be Jewish.
Very much so.
So many Bukharan Jews managed to secure exit visas, mostly with the stated intention of going to Israel.
Right.
But the geopolitics of migration are messy.
Always.
Their route takes them through Vienna, Austria.
A major transit hub.
Vienna was this transit hub run by the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, or HIAS.
Right, HIAS.
But for many families, the plan kind of derails.
Yeah, they hit a wall.
They arrive in Vienna, take stock of the situation, and decide that Israel isn't the right fit for them, maybe due to fear of the ongoing conflicts there, or just economic uncertainty.
Right. It was a very tense time.
But the Soviet authorities obviously won't let them return.
No, going back.
So they become stuck. They are stranded in Vienna.
Stranded.
And this is where a profound, agonizing identity crisis begins.
And it's an identity crisis forged in the fires of double discrimination.
Double discrimination, right.
Yeah.
Because they arrive in Vienna and are immediately hit from two sides.
The first side being the host country.
Yes. First, you have the Austrian majority society. We have to look at the labor dynamics of Austria in the 1970s. The country had brought in many Turkish guest workers to handle low-wage manual labor.
Right.
Because Bukharan Jews looked Middle Eastern or Central Asian, and they didn't speak German.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Austrians on the street often mistook them for Turkish laborers.
That is just awful.
As a result, they were subjected to the exact same xenophobia, racism, and social exclusion that the Turkish Muslim immigrants faced.
So they are receiving hostility from the host nation based on a visual misidentification.
Yes.
But the deeper, much more intimate wound came from within the Jewish community itself.
This part is just heartbreaking.
It really is.
The established Ashkenazi Jewish community in Vienna, the European Jews who had their own long, complex history in the city,
Yeah.
they completely reject it.
Completely.
They look at these Central Asian families arriving with their different customs, their different language, their different style of dress, and they simply didn't see them as real Jews.
Wow.
The prejudice was visceral. Some Ashkenazim even mock them with terrible racial slurs.
Oh, God.
The research notes that Bukharan women were sometimes called Schwarzer,
Yeah.
which is a derogatory German term that essentially translates to blackie.
It's devastating. You have to imagine the intense psychological toll this takes.
I can't even imagine.
You flee the oppressive regime of the Soviet Union.
Right.
You end up stranded in a cold foreign city where the local population resents you because they think you are a Muslim immigrant.
Yeah.
And the local Jewish community, the people who are supposed to be your safety net.
Your brothers and sisters.
Exactly. They reject you because you don't fit their European template of what a Jew looks and acts like.
It's a complete isolation.
They were marginalized in community meetings, their voices were ignored, and they were cut off from the social capital of the established community.
I'm trying to put myself in their shoes in 1970s Vienna.
Yeah, put yourself there.
You're rejected by the locals. You're mocked by the established Jewish community. You must feel entirely adrift.
Desperate, even.
You'd probably grasp at any institution that offered you a life raft.
Exactly.
Even if it meant changing how you practiced your own faith, just to prove you belonged.
Exactly. Survival in a diaspora community often requires adapting to the dominant culture's metrics of authenticity.
Wow. Metrics of authenticity.
Yeah. Now, let's look at what that European template actually was.
Okay.
In Vienna, Jewish identity was largely defined by European institutional frameworks, and increasingly for those seeking validation from the establishment, by strict adherence to religious law, or halakha.
Which was a massive culture clash, because that was totally different from how Bukharan Jews experienced their Jewishness back in the Soviet Union.
Radically different.
Back in Central Asia, being Jewish was almost an ethnicity, a deeply ingrained cultural rhythm.
Right.
It was tied to local traditions.
Yeah.
It was the specific foods your grandmother cooked.
The smells, the tastes.
Exactly. It was the familial warmth of gathering for Shabbat. It was even celebrating secular holidays like Novi God, the Soviet New Year, with your community.
Yeah.
It wasn't about sitting in a yeshiva studying strict legalistic religious texts or debating the minutiae of rabbinic law.
And there's historical reason for that.
Tell me.
Under decades of Soviet rule, formal religious education and the training of rabbis had been largely suppressed.
Ah, of course.
So their Jewishness had to become deeply cultural, deeply local, and implicitly understood within the family unit just to survive the Soviet era.
It was lived, not studied.
Beautifully put. But
Yeah.
when they got to Vienna, that beautiful cultural Jewishness wasn't recognized as valid.
It wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough. The pressure to be accepted as real Jews by the European Ashkenazi establishment forced Bukharans to adapt.
Because they had to.
Right. Sociologists have long noted that marginalized groups will often adopt the dominant group's metrics of authenticity in order to survive.
Survive and, gain access to vital resources.
Precisely, like kosher food, religious schooling for their children, basic community support.
Yeah.
For the Bukharans, survival meant adopting a more legalistic, well-founded, and strictly orthodox version of Judaism that the Europeans would finally recognize and respect.
But wait, that adaptation doesn't happen in a vacuum.
No, it doesn't.
You don't just wake up one morning in Vienna, realize the Ashkenazim are judging you,
Yeah.
and suddenly know an entirely different framework of strict religious law.
You need teachers.
Someone has to teach you. Someone has to build the infrastructure for that new identity.
That is exactly where the institutional forces step in.
Enter the institutions.
Nature abhors a vacuum, and identity in diaspora is no different. Into this void of rejection, confusion, and longing for belonging step powerful, globally organized religious movements.
Okay, who are we talking about?
These institutions fundamentally reshaped Mizrahi and Sephardic identity.
Meaning Jews from the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia.
Correct. And not just in Vienna, but worldwide.
So Sadjed's research points to two major players in this transformation.
Yes.
The first is an Israeli political and religious movement called SAS.
SAS, right.
Now, to understand their impact in Vienna, we have to look at what they were doing in Israel.
A quick detour.
SAS was founded in 1984 by a very famous, very charismatic rabbi named Ovadia Yosef. And SAS did something incredibly strategic.
What did they do?
In Israel at the time, Jews from the Middle East and North Africa were facing terrible ethnic, economic, and class discrimination from the European Ashkenazi elite who'd essentially founded the state.
Right. Similar discrimination to what we saw in Vienna.
Exactly. So Asheo came along and offered a political and spiritual home that united all these diverse Middle Eastern and North African communities under a single, unified Sephardic umbrella.
The strategic genius of SHA was how they reframed the narrative of discrimination.
How so?
They told these marginalized communities, you are failing to assimilate into Israeli society because you are backward or uneducated, as the Ashkenazim claim.
Okay.
You are being discriminated against because the secular Ashkenazi establishment has lost its way.
Yeah.
They've lost their religion, while you have maintained your holy tradition.
Oh, wow. That flips the script.
It was an incredibly empowering message. It gave them pride.
But that empowerment came with a catch.
A significant one.
Yeah.
By reframing ethnic discrimination as a matter of religious superiority, SHAS began to standardize what it meant to be a Sephardic Jew.
To create unity.
Exactly. They had to create a unified voting bloc and a unified religious practice.
Okay.
In doing so, they began replacing the incredibly diverse, rich, local traditions of Yemen, Iraq, Morocco, and Bukhara.
Yeah. With a unified, strictly Orthodox religious identity that mirrored the stringency of the Ashkenazim, but with Sephardic legal rulings.
So they basically built a massive standardized umbrella.
Right.
But to fit under it, you had to leave your unique local customs out in the rain.
That's a great way to put it.
And in Vienna, this process of standardization was accelerated even further by the arrival of Chabad.
Yes, Shabbat.
Which is a highly influential, globally organized, Orthodox Hasidic movement. Saad actually interviews the head of a Chabad center in Vienna, a man she calls Raphael, who caters to many of the Bukharan youth today.
Yes, I remember this interview.
And Raphael's quote in the research is just, it's a gut punch when you think about Karen in the poetry room.
Read the quote.
He says, quote, "There are no Bukharan traditions that one could teach. Many Bukharan traditions are Muslim things that we adopted. The religious don't do that anymore."
Wow. That quote is the absolute crux of the cultural transformation.
That's just, wow, it's so dismissive.
It is breathtaking in its erasure.
Yeah. Raphael is actively engaged in a process that the renowned anthropologist Talal Asad describes perfectly.
What does Assad say?
Asad argues that religion is not a static, timeless category.
Oh.
It is a shifting set of disciplines defined by power structures.
So whoever has the power defines the religion.
Exactly. Raphael is engaged in purifying the religion.
Purify.
He is taking the vast, rich, deeply intertwined cultural inheritance of Central Asia, right? The Shashmakam music, the specific traditions of hospitality, the shared aesthetics, the local ways of celebrating life milestones.
All that beautiful watercolor stuff.
Yes, and he is casually discarding them as mere Muslim things.
If he's drawing the Sharpie line.
Exactly. He is declaring that if a practice doesn't exist in the strict codified legal texts of European-style orthodoxy, it isn't authentically Jewish.
It's a contaminant.
It is a foreign contaminant. And by discarding the culture as a contaminant, they effectively sever the historical bridge between the Jewish and Muslim communities.
The tragedy of losing the grandmother's traditions is just palpable here.
It really is.
It's like a family that owns a custom-built, quirky, centuries-old home.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's got weird hallways, colors that clash, but
Mm-hmm.
it holds all their memories.
Yeah.
Then an inspector comes along and says, it's not up to the new municipal code.
Oh, man.
So they tear down the quirky family home and replace it with a standardized concrete franchise model.
That's entirely what happened.
Right. I mean, yes, you gain global recognition. Everyone recognizes the franchise. You get the safety and the funding of the institution.
Mm-hmm.
But you lose the local flavor. You lose the soul of the home.
You lose the soul.
I have to imagine not everyone was on board with this. Was there any pushback against this franchise model of Judaism?
Yes, absolutely. You see a deep generational divide.
I would assume so.
Some of the older generation in Vienna deeply resent this standardization.
They must hate it.
They see their grandchildren adopting this strict, rigid orthodoxy, and they feel it's actually a step backward. To them, it feels like an alien form of Judaism that they simply don't recognize from their lives in Bukhara.
Because it is alien to them.
Right. Sadjed notes that one elder in the community literally went out and built his own independent synagogue.
Oh, really?
Yes, just to maintain a sense of Bukharan family, music, and community outside of this new, rigid institutional framework.
A sanctuary for the quirky family home.
Precisely. But the tragedy is that the younger generation is navigating a completely different world.
Yeah, they don't know the old home.
They don't have the lived memories of the emirate. They don't remember the watercolor painting.
Right.
And more importantly, they are navigating a new, highly polarized political reality in modern Austria,
Politics.
where adopting a strict, legally bounded, and separate identity isn't just an internal community debate.
What is it then?
It is heavily encouraged by the state itself.
Which brings us to the political climate and how this internal identity shift is weaponized by outside forces.
Yes, the weaponization of identity.
Now, I want to pause here, just so you listening know, we are strictly looking at the academic findings from Ariane Sadjed and Ruth Wodak here.
Yes, very important context.
We're not like endorsing a political stance or picking sides on Austrian politics. We're strictly analyzing the sociological dynamic that they reported in the text.
Exactly. We are just reporting their analysis.
Right. So to understand how this separation hardened into something political, Sadjed and political scientist Ruth Wodak point to the political climate in Austria over the last decade.
Specifically under former Chancellor Sebastian Kurz.
Yes, Chancellor Kurz of the UVP party, who governed at times in coalition with the right-wing FPO. Wodak's research documented how the government utilized very specific, highly visible messaging.
Like what?
They actively paired highly demonstrative pro-Israel symbolism,
Oh, like flying the flag.
literally flying the Israeli flag over the Austrian chancellery and parliament buildings.
Wow.
And they paired that with aggressive, systemic, anti-Muslim policies.
Sociologically, this creates a fascinating and incredibly tense dynamic for minorities on the ground.
Yeah, I bet.
The state was simultaneously elevating one minority symbolically while actively targeting another.
And the policies Wodak outlines were not subtle.
Give me an example.
For example, the government published an online Islam map.
An Islam map.
Yeah, this was a digital map that identified the locations and details of hundreds of Muslim organizations, mosques, and cultural centers across Austria.
That sounds dangerous.
Well, the stated goal was transparency, but unfortunately it led to right-wing groups putting up warning signs and some mosques being targeted and vandalized.
Of course it did.
They also introduced requirements for refugees, largely from Muslim countries, to sign formal declarations against anti-Semitism in order to receive asylum. And the political logic here, as Sadjed points out, is incredibly calculated.
How so?
It's designed to reframe anti-Semitism purely as an imported problem, a disease brought into pure Austria by Muslim immigrants.
The sheer political utility of this framing cannot be overstated.
Right, serves a purpose.
By casting Muslims as the inherent imported threat,
Yeah,
and casting the Austrian state as the valiant protector of the Jews,
I see where this is going.
the host society conveniently manages to absolve itself of its own long, deep-seated, and horrific history of European anti-Semitism.
Oh, wow. It's a sleight of hand.
It's a massive sleight of hand. It turns minority groups into opposing chess pieces.
Yeah.
It forces a public narrative where minorities are played against each other, and the real historical danger of anti-Semitism becomes a convenient political instrument.
An instrument to justify harsh anti-immigration policies.
Exactly.
And what's so vital about Sadjed's ethnographic research is that she doesn't just analyze this from a bird's eye view.
No, she gets on the ground.
She shows us exactly how this top-down political discourse takes up residence inside the mind of a human being.
The story of Layla.
Yes, she introduces us to a woman named Layla. Layla is a Bukharan woman in her late 50s living in Vienna. And in her interviews, Layla has absorbed this political frame perfectly.
Totally internalized it.
When the interviewer asks her about Syrian refugees coming into Austria, Layla physically recoils. She expresses deep fear.
Right.
She specifically mentions fearing the black that they would wear, referring to traditional Islamic clothing.
She buys into the fear entirely.
Yeah, entirely. And simultaneously, she fiercely praises Chancellor Sebastian Kurz.
Of course.
She says, he loves Israel. He loves the Jews. She has completely internalized the state's narrative. Muslims are the terrifying threat. The Austrian strongman is the protector.
But this is where Sadjed's research delivers a profound, almost unbelievable twist.
It's so good.
It challenges everything we think we know about prejudice.
Yeah.
In the exact same interview, literally minutes after expressing this deep fear of Syrian refugees, Layla tells a completely different story.
Wait for it.
She casually mentions that she recently bought a pet bird on an online marketplace.
Right, just a normal everyday errand. Wait, she literally just went to buy a bird.
Yes. She goes to the seller's apartment to pick up the bird and discovers that the sellers are an Afghan family.
Oh, wow.
Now, according to the political frame she just espoused, she should be terrified.
She should run away.
Right. But what actually happens?
What happens?
She hears them speaking, and she starts speaking to them in Bukhari.
Oh my gosh.
She tells the interviewer with a sense of wonder, it's almost the same language.
The trunk unlocks.
The trunk unlocks. The Afghan family doesn't treat her as a political enemy.
Right.
They welcome her into their home, they set a table for her, they serve her tea.
Because that's the culture.
Exactly. They treat her with immense honor and hospitality, exactly as you would treat a respected elder in Central Asian culture.
That is beautiful.
They even call her weeks later just to check on how the bird is doing.
No way.
Yes. And Layla, sitting there reflecting on this, tells the interviewer, we have a lot to learn from them. They are not all bad.
Right.
Yeah.
It is amazing how Layla can hold these two entirely contradictory thoughts in her head at the exact same time.
Cognitive dissonance at its finest.
I mean, the Syrian refugee is a terrifying, faceless abstraction that makes her fear for her safety. But the Afghan bird seller is a brother who serves her tea.
It perfectly illustrates the psychology of prejudice and the power of proximity.
Proximity is key.
The abstraction, Arabs, Islam, the refugees, that produces fear.
Right.
An abstraction is essentially a blank canvas onto which top-down political rhetoric can paint monsters.
That's a great way to say it.
But the encounter, the face-to-face reality, especially an encounter conducted in a shared mother tongue, produces kinship.
Yeah, you can't hate someone you're sharing tea in a language with.
Exactly. Layla simply could not hold on to the rigid political frame of the Muslim enemy while sitting at a physical table being served tea by people speaking her grandmother's language.
The shared tongue literally cracked the political frame open.
It dismantled the Sharpie lines in real time.
So what does this all mean? I mean, I love the mechanics of that. The language short-circuits the political conditioning. But Layla's fleeting moment with the bird seller begs a massive question.
What's the question?
If a shared language can crack that political frame for a few minutes, is there anyone actually trying to keep that door wedged open permanently?
Scaling the experience.
Right. Because, let's be honest, the encounter is fragile. Sadjed is very clear about that.
Very fragile.
After the bird story, Layla still generally fears the Syrians. The political conditioning often snaps right back into place because the institutions pushing it are so powerful.
The rubber band snaps back.
Exactly. So how do we scale Layla's experience? Is anyone actively using this shared history as a tool for actual, lasting resistance?
That brings us to one of the most compelling figures in Sadjed's research.
Like, who is it?
A man who provides a roadmap for what that resistance actually looks like in practice. Sadjed introduces us to another Bukharan living in Vienna, a shop owner named Ruben.
Ruben is fascinating because he subverts every expectation.
He really does.
He is a deeply spiritual man. He studies Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism intensely, but he keeps his Jewishness very private in his public life. He runs a shop that gets a lot of foot traffic from Muslim immigrants from Central Asia and the Middle East.
Okay.
But when they come into his shop, he doesn't announce his religion. He doesn't put up boundaries.
What does he do?
He treats them, in his own words, like a brother.
Wow.
He speaks their language, whether it's a dialect of Persian or Russian. He engages with them on the level of shared culture.
What Rubin is doing is quietly revolutionary.
Quietly revolutionary, I love that.
He actively refuses to buy into the political victim narrative that the state is pushing.
Right.
He explicitly rejects the instrumentalization of European anti-Semitism, and particularly the Holocaust, as a tool to make Jews fear modern Muslim immigrants.
He sees right through the sleight of hand.
Exactly. He recognizes the political game being played, and he opts out of it entirely.
He operates on a completely different geometry of relationship.
Yes.
And this is the core argument that researchers drawing on Sadjed's work are making today about interfaith dialogue.
If we connect this to the bigger picture.
Yeah, let's connect it.
Most interfaith dialogue in the West, whether it's in Vienna, London, or New York, relies entirely on an Ashkenazi European template.
Okay.
The historical reference points brought to the table are the Holocaust and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Which is completely understandable given the immense moral weight and historical trauma of those events.
Absolutely. No one is denying that.
Right.
But structurally, when you use that specific European template as the starting point for interfaith work,
What happens?
it forces Jews and Muslims into the roles of complete strangers.
Oh.
It sets them up as opposing sides who have to laboriously build trust from scratch,
Right.
reaching across a massive, terrifying chasm of historical grievance, genocide, and modern geopolitical tension.
That is incredibly heavy, difficult work.
It is exhausting work.
But the Mizrahi and Sephardic experience, the specific experience of Jews from the Muslim world, like Karen, like Reuben,
Yeah.
it completely shifts that geometry.
It changes the entire foundation of the conversation.
How so?
These are Jews whose ancestors prayed in Arabic and Persian.
Yeah.
Their poetry, their music, their cuisine, the very cut of their clothing were continuous with their Muslim neighbors.
The watercolor painting.
Yes. The Muslim world, for the vast majority of its history, wasn't primarily a site of European-style persecution.
Right.
For centuries, it was home.
It was home.
Coexistence was the absolute norm, not the exception.
Wow.
So when you center the Bukharan or Mizrahi experience in interfaith work, Jews and Muslims are no longer strangers trying to negotiate a fraught peace treaty.
What are they then?
They are estranged family members recovering a forgotten shared household.
I love that. The difference between construction and recovery is everything.
It is everything.
Think about it in your own life, for the listener. Think about how much easier it is to reconnect with an old childhood friend you had a falling out with compared to cold calling a total stranger and trying to convince them to become your best friend.
Such a good comparison.
With a childhood friend, you already have the shared language, the shared inside jokes, the muscle memory of the relationship. That's what this shared culture does.
Exactly. And the analysts looking at Sadjed's work lay out 4 incredibly practical lessons for anyone trying to actually build bridges today.
Okay, let's hear the 4 lessons.
First, center the Jews of the Muslim world.
Right.
Bring Bukharan, Yemeni, Iraqi, Moroccan Jews to the forefront of the conversation.
Because of that muscle memory?
Yes. Their very existence, their lived history, disrupts the political lie that Jewish and Muslim are inherent ancient opposites.
Okay, second lesson.
Second, use shared culture as the doorway, not theology.
Yes.
Don't start with heavy debates over scripture or geopolitical sovereignty.
That never works anyway.
Start with the food. Start with the shashmakol music. Start with the Persian poetry.
The Omar Khayyam.
Exactly. The text refers to these as the low, wide doors.
I think about it like this. Theology and politics are high, narrow doors with strict bouncers checking IDs.
Oh, totally.
You get defensive just approaching them. But poetry and food are low, wide doors. Everyone can walk through them together without feeling threatened.
That's a beautiful metaphor, and it works perfectly.
Okay, what's lesson 3?
Third, name the political manipulation out loud.
Say it to their faces.
We have to be honest and vocal when political majorities are trying to set minorities against each other for their own electoral gain.
Yeah.
You have to expose the Sharpie lines for what they are.
And finally, the 4th lesson, which I think is the most poignant.
What's your take on it?
Expect the encounter to be temporary and fragile, and do it anyway.
Yes, do it anyway.
Layla's moment of kinship over the bird was temporary. It didn't cure her of all her prejudices instantly.
Right. She still feared the Syrians.
But for an afternoon, it widened the space in her mind. It made a different kind of relationship suddenly thinkable.
Thinkable is the first step.
If you accumulate enough of those temporary fragile moments, You eventually wear down the cognitive isolation.
You slowly rebuild the muscle memory of coexistence.
We have covered an incredible amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started with Karen in a room in Vienna, entirely shocked to hear Afghan refugees speaking her grandmother's supposedly exclusive Jewish language, Bukhari.
A truly cinematic start.
We traveled back to the Emirate Bukhara, where Jewish musicians played for the emir, and rabbis proudly lived under the wings of Ishmael.
The watercolor days.
Exactly. We watched as that beautifully blended shared culture was dismantled by the racism of 1970s Vienna, which forced stranded Bukharan Jews to adopt European religious metrics just to survive.
Force them into the mold.
We saw how institutions standardized that identity, labeling centuries of shared culture as Muslim things to be discarded.
And we navigated the dark waters of modern political weaponization, where the state actively pits minorities against each other.
And finally, we found a roadmap in Reuben and the low, wide doors of shared cultural memory.
The recovery of the household.
The profound realization that we aren't building peace from scratch, we are just remembering a forgotten friendship.
It is a remarkable, sobering, yet ultimately hopeful trajectory.
It really is.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you listening with a final thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
We've seen today how immense geopolitical and social pressures, migration, racism, institutional standardization, and political rhetoric, how all of that can cause an entire community to literally forget its own mother tongue and actively rewrite its own history of peaceful coexistence, all in the staggering span of just 2 generations.
2 generations. It's nothing.
If human memory is truly that malleable, if our deepest identities can be reshaped that quickly to serve the needs of the present,
What's the question?
what other ancient, unbreakable animosities in our world today are actually just recent inventions?
Oh, wow.
What shared languages, what shared histories are you right now being conditioned to forget?
A profound question to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
Keep questioning the narratives you are handed. Keep looking for those low, wide doors. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find out that the stranger across the table has been speaking your mother tongue all along.